I'd like to say to everyone, I want to welcome everyone to the second half of our town meeting warrant article program. My name is Arthur Conquest, and I'm the president of the Town Meeting Members Association, as well as a town meeting member from Precinct 6. I greet everyone who is here and who's also out in the listening audience. We're bringing you this from the 6th floor of Town Hall, as well as those people that are in the audience through big TV who are watching. Let me start up by introducing the other offices of the Town Meeting Members Association. And again, please stand or raise your hand. Town Meeting Member from Precinct 9, George Abbott White, who's the Vice President. Town Meeting Member for Precinct 12, Harry Friedman. Is Harry here? No. And he's the corresponding secretary. Ernie Frey, who's a town meeting member from Precinct 7 and is the recording secretary, but he's also the timekeeper this evening. And Susan F. Cohen is the organization treasurer and also the person who is providing those wonderful victuals. I want to also recognize Michael Sandman. He's chair of the advisory committee, and recognize Joanna Baker. I don't see her, but I'd like to recognize her nonetheless. She's a town meeting member from Precinct 13, and Betsy DeWitt, president of the League of Women Voters. And I mention these people all because they were the ones that have put this event together and worked very hard to make it happen. Town meeting members are not always in agreement on warrant articles submitted to town meeting, which means there are pros and cons. Forums like the one being presented this evening give town meeting members and the general public the opportunity to debate their concerns and their warrant articles to the public. The audience present will have an opportunity to participate by posing questions to the participants. I hope everyone involved will gain knowledge and an understanding of the important issues being raised. Last but not least, I want to introduce the moderator for the evening, Amelia Koch, and she will keep everybody in line. So give us your undivided attention, and everybody have a wonderful debate. Thank you very much.
I'm Betsy DeWitt, current president of the League of Women Voters, and I welcome all from the League, both the people in the room and the people who will be watching. I'm going to just do a brief overview of the forum. There are 7 warrant articles, and 3 will have 2 speakers tonight, and we will have time afterwards for questions. And I'm just going to give you a little background of the status of these articles. Article 24, which is the one having to do with citizen complaints, has several different positions taken, although they sort of converge at some point. Select Board has voted to refer to the Diversity Commission, and the Advisory Committee and Committee on Town Organization and Structure have voted to refer to a Moderators Committee, and the School Committee recommends no action. On Article 21, the Select Board has voted favorable action in agreement with the Advisory Committee with an amended vote, and I think you will hear about that in the presentation. On Article 29, the Select Board voted favorable action for a fund using 35% of the local marijuana option tax revenue. An advisory committee has voted to fund with an annual budget appropriation. On Article 30, the Select Board has voted favorable action on the advisory committee's vote to refer to the Diversity Commission to study and draft a community engagement plan. Articles 24, 29, and 30 all have impacts on the Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. Since no one from the Commission could be here with us tonight, we have asked, oh, actually, we have a Commission member here. Thank you. But we did ask for some written materials, and so out in the area with the refreshments, you'll find a written a copy of the votes that were taken by the Commission on each of the warrant articles that have impact on the Commission. And in that write-up, you will also see on page 2, which I think is worth looking at, a set of items that are an initial list of the impact that the warrant article might have if it were to be referred to the Commission and the Commission staff. And since there are 3 articles that affect the Commission, it's important to have this background information. Finally, we will discuss the special town meeting on retail marijuana establishments. And Articles 1 and 2 will be taken together because they deal with operating conditions. And then Article 3 will be treated separately. We'll take questions from the audience with a portable microphone, so please be prepared to raise your hand to be recognized. And now I'm going to hand off to our moderator, Amelia Koch, an experienced League of Women Voters meeting leader who will steer us through this list of articles. And for the record, there is a timekeeper sitting up here, wave your hand, on the front row. And I'm just going to advise speakers, speak into the microphone because we're told otherwise nobody can hear you. Thank you.
Very good. So, beginning with Article 24, the citizen complaint, we have an explanation coming from Michael Sandman. So if he would come forward, please. Michael, you have 5 minutes for your explanation and elucidation of this warrant article. And if you would please keep an eye on Ernie, he'll guide you to a clean ending.
5 minutes is much too long. This is really pretty straightforward, even though the solution to it may not be. What's being requested is that the town set up a mechanism for people who have a complaint regarding some encounter that they feel has been discriminating against them because of race, because of disability, because of gender preference, something of that nature. Provide a mechanism for complaints of that sort that, as a practical matter, don't rise to the level of being something the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination is likely to take up. It's like and don't rise to the level of something that can be perhaps or should be perhaps brought to the courts. There is nothing short of MCAD apart from a provision in the bylaw that created the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission that hands the obligation to that commission. But unfortunately, the commission is overloaded. The staff that supports the commission, the department, is seriously understaffed for all of the tasks that we in town meeting have handed it. So the question is, okay, what do we do about that? And if it's referred in accordance with what the Committee on Town Organization and Structure and the Advisory Committee is suggesting, then it would be referred to a moderators committee that would look for models in other communities that have encountered the same issue and that have managed to come up with a solution that appears to work. Alternatively, the commission itself would like to have it handed back so that they can deal with it. Quite honestly, I think the difficulty with that is they remain understaffed, and they remain in sort of up to their ears in work. But even in either case, it does make sense to refer it back to someone who can take a serious look at the issue and to take it seriously. Recognize that someone who has an encounter of that sort does need some mechanism to bring it forward. Just one of the things I think is really important to make clear is it's brought the warrant article is brought forward by one person, and that does not mean it's a one-person problem. This is a problem that a great many people, especially people of color, have encountered across town. I can tell you that it applies much more broadly than you may think. I have a son-in-law whose parents are Indian, and he can tell you stories of being stopped while driving while brown. It's really important that these kinds of small things be dealt with the people who are committing the discriminatory act. And the best way to do that is at the community level. So the advisory committee's recommendation is to refer it to a moderates committee, as is C2S's, and the alternative is to send it back to DICR. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sandman, before you disappear, should we see if there are inquiries? You never know. Somebody might want to know a little bit more than you've offered.
Questions?
I'm the petitioner.
You can ask a question.
I want to make a presentation.
Then come forward.
Is that, no, go ahead, go ahead. Can I make a presentation and then ask him his question?
You can come forward.
Thank you.
Not a can you come forward, but this is your meeting, Arthur.
Just give me 2 minutes.
Go ahead, yeah, of course.
Arthur, more or less, how long would you like to take?
I'm going to take 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Ernie, so noted.
Again, Arthur Conquest, town meeting member, Precinct 6, and I'm the petitioner for warrant Article 24. Article 3.14 of Brookline's bylaws states that its Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, also known as DICA, would be established to address the disease of racism by supporting a welcoming environment that fosters cooperation, tolerance, respect, and togetherness by all persons who come in contact with the town, including residents, visitors, persons passing through the town, employees, employers, and job applicants, and by advancing, promoting, and advocating for human and civil rights of all through education, awareness, outreach, and advocacy. Valuing diversity and inclusion in and for the Brookline community, DICA's goal is to support a welcoming atmosphere. The authors of 3.14 define inclusion as actively pursuing goals of interconnecting, integrating, engaging, and welcoming into Brookline all persons who come in contact with the town, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, age, religion, creed, ancestry, national origin, military or veteran status, marital status, receipt of public benefits, including housing subsidies, etc., making all of the aforementioned part of the town's protected class. But the protected class in Brookline are really what I call the targeted class. They're stopped by the police more often, whether it's driving or just walking on the street, entering a public building, or even while trying to vote at a polling station on election day. Black children have been called monkeys by their teachers and even much worse by other students in the public schools. The town's 3.14 bylaw states that incidents like some of those just mentioned could be handled by DICA, the town's Civil Rights Commission. But DICA is like a roaring tiger with no teeth. It was purposely created by the white power structure to be powerless and take the protected class on a journey to nowhere, as in refer complaints to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, a political pally of Brookline's apartheid-light system. Hence, there is no public record of injustice in Brookline. Complaints filed just get swept under the rug. And the complaints to MCAD fall into a hole where they can be lost for up to 5 to 6 years before they are addressed. There's an appearance that the law is placed to combat racism and discrimination, that something is being done to assist to the protected class, when in fact the town's bylaws are totally bankrupt. All branches of town government, the select board, the advisory committee, the Committee on Organization and Structure, and DICA have filed substitute motions to refer Warrant Article 24 for study with a Moderators Committee or back to DICA. This is a facsimile of Bylaw 3.14, which was falsely created in the first place in 2013 by a group of so-called experts who haven't walked a single step in the shoes of the protected class. It's like having the power to rule on Roe versus Wade. Finally, has there been any racial progress in Brookline since I arrived here in '82? I'd be a fool, as I asserted publicly before, if I were to say there hasn't been. But the town is moving forward 1 mini centimeter at a time, kicking and screaming and denying every step of the way that there is a racial problem systematically destroying careers, dreams, lives, and aspirations of the protected class, especially children along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur. Mr. Sandman and Mr. Conquest are available for questions if there are any. Please.
My name is Jane Gilliman. I'm sorry if I missed this, but is there any adjudicatory power? What happens once an incident is reported under your warrant article? Thank you.
I don't see why the DICA Commission shouldn't have the power to investigate and refer it to the appropriate authorities. I mean, they had that power once before the DICA Commission was created. The Human Relations Youth Resource Commission had those powers, and I don't see why they were taken away. Well, I do know why, but I think they can be reinstated, and maybe, as someone said, create a subcommittee, a small subcommittee of lawyers or whatever who would only meet when issues that are legal come before the DICA Commission. But the present system, which is to ignore the problem altogether and just sweep it under the rug, there have been no complaints, racial complaints, dealt with by the Diversity Commission in 3 years. So, I mean, I think that's wrong.
So I absolutely agree that that's wrong. And the question is, who should have what sorts of authority? And the concern is that the commission members are volunteers. They're people who don't necessarily have legal training, and to ask them to take on a responsibility that involves investigating situations, asking for testimony, taking that testimony, maintaining records and so forth, is something that is probably not appropriate for a purely voluntary commission, and it puts them potentially as individuals potentially at risk for liabilities that they may not want to risk. So there's some question, at least from the response of the members of the commission, as to whether they would even be willing to take on investigative powers. The question is what is a proper mechanism, and that's what the referral process would hopefully turn up.
So my name's Kaya Vanderzeel. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 15, and I'm on the Commission for Diversity, et cetera. And I also helped write the complaint process for the commission. There are two separate complaint processes, one for the Chief Diversity Officer and the Office of Diversity, and the other for the Commission for Diversity. Yes, it is true, not a single complaint has come to us. And, I'd like to say that why would you if there's no ability to do anything? It's a very complex issue, this whole thing. And if you read what the commission has written, if you got that, on this, is we amended the Arthur's warrant article to say that this would not take effect till July 1, 2021, and that is to give the town, whoever is involved, and it could be the commission and the Office of Diversity, to come up with a better plan. I do agree that members of the commission, by and large, feel like they do not want to get into a legal problem, because most of us are not lawyers. The closest I come, I'm a physician. I did a lot of peer review stuff, but that's all behind closed doors, and this is not, so we'd have to have better rules about how this whole thing gets handled. But that's our position, Lloyd does get complaints along these lines. Most of his complaints are actually about ADA compatibility.
Thank you, and I believe there's another question in the back. And yes, Arthur, you can respond to that in a minute, yeah.
Hi, I'm Don Van Scork from Precinct 13 and the Advisory Committee. And I was blessed to be the chair of the ad hoc committee for the Advisory Committee that dealt with Article 24. And I just want to support what Kayla just said, but also underscore something. It's important for people to make the distinction between the office and the commission. There's the Diversity and Inclusion Community Relations Commission, and then there's the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Office. And as was just explained, Lloyd Gelano, the director of the office, does receive complaints, has received complaints, reports regularly to the commission on the disposition of those complaints. So there is a process. Complaints do come to the office. Complaints are dealt with. Records are kept. Part of the procedure when complaints are brought to the office is to make a determination as to whether to refer the complainant to the MCAD. What has instigated this particular article, which is frankly doing us all a favor by causing us to pause and evaluate and determine if we think that we have a satisfactory process. But what seems to have spurred this is there is a widespread feeling that referrals to the MCAD, in effect, send this to a place where it doesn't get any satisfactory treatment. And so it's not so much, we have a couple of questions to deal with here. Do we think the MCAD is a useful body at the state level to which to refer local complaints? But also, if not, then what do we do with local complaints? But please don't be misled into thinking we have no process. We actually have a pretty carefully thought through process. I received a good and useful email from someone on the commission today who explained, and this makes sense to me, that complainants aren't comfortable bringing their complaints to a body of several people. They're more comfortable bringing it to an individual, Lloyd Gelano, in private, in a one-to-one situation, and that might explain in part why he tends to get the complaints and they do not. So that's something to be studied, and in fact, the article that created this current setup back in 2016, 2014, specifically called for the commission to take 5 years to see if this process was working satisfactorily, to evaluate it and to report back to town meeting, and they will be doing that in 2020. So there's a lot going on here, and I think this might explain why the advisory committee and the select board felt rather than adopt the article as is, this needs to be allowed to get to the point where at the 5-year mark, the commission can evaluate and report to town meeting, and another body, the Committee on Town Organization and Structure, can also take a look at the proceedings of the commission and report to town meeting. So that's just my input on this, and thank you for listening.
Well, thank you for your comment, and I'd like to let the presenters
But
respond.
I'll let the audience,
Great.
go ahead, Ms. Brown, go ahead. Ms. Brown? Sure. Or Larry Oni? You don't need the microphone. Go ahead. Okay, yes.
Yeah, my name is Deborah Brown, Precinct 1 Town Meeting member, and, to say that we're going to wait for 5 years, that only works if the system works. And one of the issues that I see in this town is, in addition to individual complaints, but the systemic issues. And, that's like looking at across the board, like who handles the broader housing issues in this town? How do they get addressed? Do they get addressed? Do we have someone who's actually writing Title VI reports for this town? Who goes through and evaluates our EEO4 reports? I used to do some of this. But the point is that if this system can get us a little closer, and part of what I'm talking about is actually just basic compliance. And so, if somebody woke up on the wrong side of bed and they sued this town, I have a sick feeling that we would waste millions of dollars because we don't have the appropriate infrastructure to address the kinds of issues that go on day in and day out. And it's not just from the employee's perspective, but it's from the perspective of the residents. And I think that's part of what Arthur's warrant article gets at. It's not just that individual. We have to look at how this system, how this town operates as a system. So that's my point.
Okay, can you be brief, please?
Larry Oni, I have a question of John. Does Lloyd have a written contract from the town? And if so, what is the length of his contract?
So broadly speaking, town staff are not given, with the exception of I know the superintendent has a contract, but by and large, department heads are employees at will. And that's typical pretty much across the board. An employee at will is an employee at will. Yep.
I just want to make just one brief comment. So I understand that there are legal issues involved in terms of the staff for Dicker and how they interact with people that might file complaints. But what about the victims? So what if John Doe is discriminated against in any way, shape, fashion, or form? Do you just, as I say, has been the case for the last couple of years, that you sweep under the rug and don't deal with that person? Don't deal with the offenses that have been directed at them. And then the second thing that I wanted to say is, I personally, and Kaya knows this, I personally went to the Dicker Commission with a complaint, and they ignored me. They knew why I was there, okay, and they waited. I sat for 2 hours, and they told me that public comment had passed by. So I understand why there are no complaints that have been filed by the Dicker Commission.
Are there additional comments or questions from either the petitioner or the listening audience, participating audience? That being said, we're going to move forward towards the next warrant article, and that would be Article 21. And could we have an explanation from Kathleen Scanlon? And thanks to everyone for their participation in that discussion. It was not initially on our agenda, but I think it was an extremely important discussion. Thank you all.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Scanlon. I'm a Precinct 3 town meeting member and coordinator for Brookline Mothers Out Front, and one of the co-petitioners for warrant Article 21. Thank you to the TMMA and the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. Warrant Article 21 is a bylaw that's going to prohibit installation of fossil fuel piping in new buildings and in major renovations of existing buildings. This policy will require heat, hot water, and appliances that are installed during new construction and major renovations to be all electric. This bylaw is intended to facilitate a practical transition to fossil fuel-free buildings. And some of the exemptions that have been discussed with the various boards and committees include fuel piping for backup generators for emergencies, for all cooking, both residential and for restaurants, and for central domestic hot water systems in large buildings, and some labs. So the bylaw would be triggered when any new construction occurs. It would also be triggered for 1 to 2 family homes if the construction work area is greater than 75% of the floor area. And in commercial or multifamily housing, it would also be triggered if the construction work area is greater than 50% of the floor area. Cosmetic types of improvements such as painting and floor refinishing would not count towards the work area. So in its climate action plan, Brookline has committed to reducing its carbon emissions to 0 by 2050. More recently, the United Nations IPCC announced in 2018, the report that many of us have heard about, that we have to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% by the year 2030 in order to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. And buildings account for 60 to 70% of Brookline's emissions. Every new building constructed with fossil fuel infrastructure makes meeting that emissions goal harder, because we're basically burning things for the next 30 years. To meet our climate goal, we need to stop burning things through the retrofitting of our buildings. It is unfair to expect that the next generation for us to continue to install infrastructure that we already know will need to be replaced in such a short time. It's just not good fiscal policy. This bylaw is an essential step if we are to have any hope of reaching Brookline's climate goals of 0 emissions by 2050. Eliminating fossil fuel infrastructure during new construction or major renovations is by far the most cost-effective way to decarbonize. All electric construction is practical and feasible right now. Numerous all-electric buildings have been built recently in Massachusetts. The co-petitioners spoke to over 100 people in the design, construction, and development worlds who have already been working on these types of projects for fossil fuel free. As an architect myself, there is cost-effective and energy-efficient systems that exist today for heating and cooling, domestic hot water, and other appliances for most buildings and applications. Dramatic improvements in heat pump technology and building envelope technology now make it practical and cost-effective to heat new buildings with electricity in our climate. In closing, we want to make sure Brookline's transition to clean energy is equitable. Affordable housing here in Brookline is actually out in front in Brookline on this issue with 2 projects that are undergoing renovation as fossil fuel free. My co-petitioners and I worked with many staff boards and, many boards here in Brookline and staff to make this as practical as possible and a bylaw that works for everybody. We want all Brookline families to reap the benefits of renewable energy. So with that, I guess I'm going to take questions at this point.
Correct, exactly.
And I do want to point out, I think Michael or Betsy had indicated that there were different versions of this, this bylaw that were proposed originally. And through the various processes and meeting with boards, we have widened the exemptions. So for instance, with the AC committee, we had met with them and included an exemption for cooking in residences. And that may not show up if you're looking at the very original proposal that we had. So I just want to make that clear. It would exempt all cooking.
Thank you. So, yes, please.
Why did you exempt cooking? I mean, I cook with induction, and it's as good, if not better than
Why did you exempt electrics cooking? Oh, my name is Deborah Brown, and I'm a Precinct 1 town meeting member.
I couldn't have said that better myself. The reason why is because, you know, although induction cooking is well used in many parts of the world, there are some people who feel that they just can't let go of their gas stove, or for other reasons. We felt like we would make the switch and then allow the culture to catch up and, you know, with the market.
Did anybody discuss, Deborah Brown, Precinct 1, some of the health implications of using gas cooking?
Yes, that came up in one of our meetings with the AC committee. There was a letter that I believe was circulated on the TMM listserv that documented some concerns about electromagnetic fields with induction cooking. Our response, to gas? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, gas is a real concern. We worry about pollution and health effects. You know, there are some, definite reasons to move away from gas, but we exempted cooking because it's only 2% of our overall emissions. And like I said, there were some concerns about people who weren't ready to let go of their gas stove, and we didn't want that to impede us moving forward.
I believe we have an additional question, if you would identify yourself.
Question. I just want to provide a little illumination what Kathleen referred to in the discussions between the petitioners and the advisory committee. Gas accounts for something on the order of 2% of a household's gas cooking rather accounts for something like 2% of a typical household's use of gas, and what we were concerned about was getting a resolution together that would get the widest possible support. And we were very concerned that when people heard that they couldn't renovate a kitchen and move a gas stove, that there would be widespread opposition and perhaps even widespread attempts at noncompliance. So it seemed like a small thing to do. And similarly, commercial cooking appliances, the restaurateurs were concerned about the potential need to switch to electric. But the thing that loomed largest in our heads was residents and residential construction.
An additional question, I believe, and if you would identify yourself. Oh, two, so.
So, Kay Vanderzeel, town meeting member from Precinct 15, also on the board of Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility. And so, one of the things we work on are climate change issues, toxins in the environment, nuclear weapons abolition. There are clear dangers of cooking with gas in your home for your children. They have an increased risk of asthma. There are a variety of things. I mean, I was at my daughter. She has a gas stove. Her husband works in the cooking industry. the smell is even noxious. Anyway, so that's one point. If you're renovating your kitchen and that's all you're doing, unless you have a very small house, your kitchen is not 75% of your house. So that would automatically be not included in that would have a waiver. So, and Ming Tsai of Blue Ginger cooks all his cooking with induction. He says it's a little difficult to learn, but it's not that difficult. So there are clear health risks to gas, in addition to all the climate change issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, can I just point out, though, there is a full appeal and waiver process that will be in place before this bylaw would take effect. So if anyone needed to go that route, it would be available.
And I believe there's one more question up front, and then we have Arthur.
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3. I believe the architects in the room could speak to my belief that most home renovations are kitchens and bathrooms, unless you're doing a total gut. So I'm wondering why the 75% threshold became part of the Warrant article, where we've identified. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, just
Recognizing another.
yeah, just we really have to move more quickly to reduce our carbon footprint. I mean, this is a life and death calamity that we are facing. So I'm just wondering how that threshold got established. Thank you.
Did you want to, Carlos presided over the hearing.
My name is Carlos Hidrojo. I was on the subcommittee for planning and regulation. We sort of went through, we went through the whole analysis of this article. And the reason why we went to 75% instead of 50 was to increase the threshold of, we increased the threshold so that we guarantee that when you are renovating a house at 75, most likely it will be a gut rehab. So therefore, the windows, the building envelope will be improved, and the building will be using less energy. No matter what energy it's using, it will be using less energy. If it was 50%, there would be a chance that the building, just interior, is modified, and the building envelope, the windows and doors and insulation are not upgraded, and therefore the result project will be using not less energy, but maybe the same amount of energy, regardless if it's electric or not. So the goal, I think, at the end was to have better buildings that use less energy, and in this case, they'll be using electric energy. I'm not sure if that answered your question. Yes, and it's the debate went through many weeks, and I think the important part also to understand is that we need to make our buildings more efficient, and therefore, by going to the 75%, you're most likely improving the building envelope. So you're using less energy, which is better for the environment.
I believe there was one more question in front. Arthur, would you like to ask a question? Okay. In that case, we have one over here on the left-hand side.
Hi, I'm Lisa Cunningham. I'm a co-petitioner. I'm also an architect. Excuse me, I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments. I think that what was most important to the co-petitioners is that we had broad consensus throughout the town, and we have something that everybody can get behind. And now we have to, as many people have commented, we actually have to go forward, get this passed, and this is only a beginning for Brookline. This is just the beginning of what we're going to need to do. We're going to have to strengthen this warrant article, as people in the audience have pointed out, and we've got to go forward and be more aggressive in fulfilling our climate goals, because as many people here have pointed out, we do have a climate crisis, and we have to address it with as much urgency as possible. So I just want to thank everybody for their comments, and Kathleen for her great presentation. Thank you.
Great. And if it's appropriate, we could move on to Article 29. And I have an explanation by petitioner Donnell O'Neill and Neil Gordon. And each of you will have 5 minutes to speak. Are both of you speaking? Good. So,
yeah, Neil's here. Neil,
great.
Do you want to speak first? No. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thanks,
And
guys.
I just want to invite you to
So my-
keep track of Ernie.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Donnell O'Neill, Sr., town meeting member from Precinct 4. Petitioner of Warrant Article 29. Raul actually is a co-petitioner of this warrant article. My main motion is not going to be the original warrant article. It's going to be the select board's recommendation that they're in favor of. But I want to just let you know why I wrote this article. I wrote this resolution because deep in my heart, I believe that my home sweet home of Brookline, Massachusetts feels like I feel about the importance of inclusion, equal rights, and supporting everyone, especially people of color who need our support. That Brookline is committed to help in any way that we can, so that all who have hopes and dreams of a better life are truly allowed to dream and hope with our help and support, we'll be able to reach that goal. Deep in my heart, I truly believe this. Brookline has a unique opportunity to do the right thing with our new marijuana revenue that shined a negative light on a class of people for many years and make a difference, a positive difference, in those folks' lives. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Life's most urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" Brookline's own JFK said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Well, Warrant Article 29 is what Brookline can do. Warrant Article 29 gives Brookline the opportunity to provide hope to those who only have hope to survive. Warrant Article 29 would allow those hopes and goals for so many people who've been trying to overcome and have sung that gospel song that we shall overcome someday becomes a reality and not just a dream. I once read somewhere a little bit of a Hong Kong proverb that said, as long as we have hope, we have direction, the energy to move, and the map to move on. Warrant Article 29 will provide hope by funding programs and projects catered to people who've been trying to reach their goals, have not due to systemic racism, lack of support from their elected officials, or any other obstacles that have impeded their hopes and dreams of a better life. The remarkable Hannah More, who was an educator and a social reformer, once said, "Goals help you overcome short-term problems." Well, I'm here to tell you that I'm from a generation that believes those words from the gospel song that we shall overcome someday. I'm also from that generation that believes that someday is now. By voting yes on Warrant Article 29, we are sending a strong message to everyone, the Commonwealth, the United States of America, everywhere, that we shall overcome starts here and now in Brookline, Massachusetts. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you.
Good evening. I'm Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting Member, speaking on the Advisory Committee's position on Warrant Article 29. Warrant Article 29 was filed by the petitioner to support underserved Brookline residents seeking to establish businesses within and around the town of Brookline. In its original form, it called for establishing a fund for this purpose. The main motion, now offered by the Select Board, calls instead for up to 35% of the town's receipts for marijuana sales tax to be used for unspecified programs administered under the direction of the town's diversity office with oversight by the Diversity Commission. The advisory committee was presented with a series of warrant articles during its review for the fall town meeting, which, if approved, would, in the committee's opinion, burden town staff. The main motion before us now, in addition, asks for a direct allocation of marijuana sales tax revenues. Town hall discussions of a number of these articles led, directly or indirectly, to offhand suggestions that the town's marijuana sales tax revenues be used to fund not only programs, as called for by the Select Board's motion, but staff additions as well. Therein lies the advisory committee's dilemma. Projected revenues from marijuana dispensaries do not generate excess funds. Rather, they balance the budget. Most recently, our interim superintendent delivered what was described as a sobering budget update, describing revenue shortfalls and cost increases within the schools. These result in $3.5 million in reductions that the schools will need to make to balance their budget. There are no excess funds. As the town's finance committee, the advisory committee is wary of articles that present ideas, albeit good ones, that include unfunded mandates and the earmarking of general revenues outside the context of Brookline's annual budget development and review process. Good ideas, including the petitioners, need to be weighed against other good ideas, ideas presented in town meeting resolutions, developed by our boards, committees, and commissions, or by town staff, or lobbied directly by the public. They need to be weighed against our fundamental obligations to educate our children, maintain public safety, provide affordable housing, help our seniors age in place, and more. For these reasons, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on its substitute motion. The town meeting urged the select board to offer an appropriation for racial equity advancement as part of the town's annual budget cycle.
Thank you. Are there comments and questions from the audience? And if we could please keep these brief, as I know we'll need to close down at some point.
Donnell, I'm Kaya Vanderzeel, town meeting member, precinct 15. Do you accept the advisory committee's revised version?
Substitute motion?
Substitute motion?
No, I'm going with my main motion with the select board's recommendation.
Jane Gilman, Precinct 3. I recently saw a cartoon and it had a bunch of animals lined up, rabbits, alligators, elephants, and such. There was a monkey among them, and there was a tree there, and someone presiding at the desk said, okay, this is a level playing field, all you guys climb the tree. There's only one person who could climb that tree. That was a tree climbing animal. So I offer this as what's in my head is that we have school needs, we have public safety needs, we have all these budget crunches, and it's really hard to balance the budget. But my point is not all of us are starting from the same point. So to say we're going to, equitably divide it among these parts is not an equitable paradigm.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Paul Warren. I'm a Precinct 1 town meeting member, and I've worked with Donnell on his warrant article. And I just wanted to provide just kind of a quick perspective. When the Cannabis Control Commission set up its policies around equity, the intention was for people of color in disadvantaged groups to be able to benefit from the cannabis industry. And frankly, they haven't, especially in Brookline. Our bylaws have set up cannabis in such a way that the zoning, 5,000 square feet, only very large, highly capitalized corporations, often national corporations, can actually afford to benefit from cannabis in Brookline. And so we actually don't have any equity applicants in Brookline, not one of the four that we have. And so when Donnell and I talked about this, and he was telling me about his warrant article, and he was kind of being shooed away for asking for money, It actually upset me. You know, we keep promising people of color that they're going to participate and benefit from cannabis, and they're not. And frankly, the motion from advisory is get back in line. You know, when do we actually let people of color benefit from cannabis? Let them line first. Up to the first 35%, I think it's fair. We need to stop saying, wait your turn. It's time to let them get their turn. Thank you.
I believe we have two people who wish to speak on the right-hand side. Arthur, you were one, but I think someone behind you had their hand up first. Did you? Oh, you're good? Okay. Arthur?
Is this, can you hear me? Okay.
And you're Arthur. You're
Arthur Conquest,
You're Arthur
Town Meeting
Conquest.
Member Precinct 6. That's one of the problems that we won't address. You see, poor people, or let me put it this way, the protected class are not represented when the decisions are made. We love to talk about that, and I'm not going to mention names, but going way back, maybe 20 some odd years ago, 1998, when they had the Ryder Cup, and the country club donated $500,000 a year to the town of Brookline. How many Black, Latino, Asian, and poor people, as the petitioners got a chance to use that $500,000, even to this day, if you go to the Brookline Foundation, you'll see that we're the recipient. People run programs for us. We don't run the programs. And we have to stop that. We have to find ways to train people, okay, and get them involved in controlling their own destiny and allowing them to speak for themselves rather than other people speaking and doing for us.
Deborah Brown, Town Meeting Member number 1. And this actually just looped right back in to Arthur's warrant article. If we had a truly functioning, diversity and inclusion office, some of these issues would have been addressed. And that's not just the office. That's something that emanates from the top. And so when I first read the warrant article, I thought of Arthur's, and I support it, and it's long overdue, and anything that happens there, I think is going to hopefully bleed into actually having a robust diversity and inclusion program, including oversight.
Thank you.
Additional comments? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you for your
very
time.
much, both
Thank
of
you.
you. And I'd like to call forward the Community Engagement Plan petitioner, Deborah Brown.
No, I never had a flash. No, because it's a Mac. You need a special. It's okay. So my name is Deborah Brown, and I'm here to discuss Warrant Article 30. And Warrant Article 30 deals with. Pardon me?
Got to speak into the mic.
Oh, sorry. I'll speak. You just like me. So my name is Deborah Brown, Precinct 1, and I am a co-petitioner for Community Engagement Warrant Article number 30. And very quickly, how many people in here know what community engagement is? So maybe a third of the people in here know what community engagement is. So I've got 5 minutes.
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
I'll do it in 5. Community engagement enables a more contextualized understanding of community members' perceptions of the topics and contexts and facilitate stronger relationships among and between community members. What it really is a way to begin to think about how to problem solve, how to make sure that when you ask a question, there's actually somebody on the other end listening. Now, one of the reasons that we got to Warrant Article 30 was because I asked repeatedly, where are the community engagement plans? You know, how do we formally ensure that people are made aware of the decision-making that takes place in this town? And so the purpose really is to ensure that our government is as responsive to us as is possible. And I don't mean that in the context of, you know, backbreaking, but I do mean it in the context that, you know, that we have leaders that, one, think about the purpose of engagement, that they have an understanding of who the stakeholders are, that there's a conversation about the resources that are needed for community engagement, the opportunities that exist for community engagement, that there's a context for the messaging. You know, it's not one size fits all. And you know, what works and what doesn't work. So one of the things that happened is today I was reading an email that said, somebody said, you know, we have pretty good community relations. And it was about, we post things online, we have emails, and I thought, and therein lies the problem. And I'm going to pick on Netta for a second. If there had been a robust community engagement, we might not be here. And that means that the people at Netta that thought they had done what they were supposed to do, who did what they were told they needed to do, might not be trying to figure out, you know, how to get the community off their backs. That was incumbent upon us to say, maybe if people aren't showing up at the meetings, you need to go door to door. Just slip a flyer under the door. No, I'm not saying mail it. Put it under the door. There are different kinds of community engagement that need to take place. You know, the Pier 1 facility. I was shocked when I showed up the second week in August for a community meeting with Select Board, and these poor residents are saying, but it's summer. We you know, people aren't here. That's not good community engagement. It's also not good economic development. I mean, I felt sorry for the company. They did what they were told. They showed up. But that's not what the community needed. No one needed that. The town's website navigation. Okay, that says it all. But I'm going to talk about some things that work well. The community development block grant process. They send emails out far and wide. The climate change charrette. DICR actually does community pop-ups around town where they just randomly show up. So there are some things that work, but there are a lot of things that don't work. Tell me when I'm down to 2 minutes. And so really what the scope is to really ask the town, and the lead player in this would be Diversity and Inclusion Office, to begin to scope out what meaningful community engagement consists of in this town. And we didn't get into the nitpicky with the bylaw, because community engagement is actually something that you need to tailor. It's something that you have to think about. Lastly, diversity, DICR is on board with this process. They said they could do it. They said that they have the consulting money to make it happen. So I would ask your support for Warrant Article 30. I think it's going to be really good for the town. Thank you.
If you want to just stand for a minute and let's see if there are questions. So are there inquiries about the plan for community engagement? Very good.
Thank you all.
We are now going to address Article S3-1, limit RME hours of operation, with petitioner Paul Warren and Carol Levin. And they have 5 minutes each.
And I'm just going to inform folks that we have here tonight representatives from the NETA marijuana operation and also from the sanctuary operation who will be available for comment after we hear from the petitioners. Oh dear. I think you have to put, oh, you got it. Oh, you got it. Question that needs to be addressed. So it seems a missing cable will be produced. Yes, right. The solution is on its way.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, thank you. Are we talking about scooters tonight? No, I can't get off the hook. We got to talk about cannabis. My name is Paul Warren. I'm a Precinct 1 town meeting member. Am I facing here or there? I'm not sure which way I'm supposed to be going. I'm one of 10 co-petitioners for special town meeting 3, and I'm one of the 877 registered voters that actually signed the petition for special town meeting 3. I'm also here with Dan Saltzman is one of our co-petitioners, as well as Faith Michaels. She's in the back, so hopefully if there's some questions that I can't answer, they will jump in. I have a few slides here I'm just going to walk through real quick for the home audience so that they can see. First, our regulations were created before any cannabis stores opened in Massachusetts. And we currently know what our zoning and bylaws for cannabis look like at 3,931 customers per day. Neta is by far the largest cannabis operation, retail cannabis adult use in the United States, 4 times larger than the largest shop in Colorado, and 50 times larger than the average shops in that area. And just for context, the average alcohol store in Massachusetts is $1.8 million a year, with about 200 customers a day. Over 4 or 5 various public meetings in this room and others, hundreds of residents have shown up and given facts and experience-based testimony about the impact that having the largest, unanticipated largest cannabis shop in the country, in their neighborhood, was having on them. I'm not going to go through the details of that, but I think there's been enough in the news and videos around that. We've had a lot of conversations about Boston and shops in Boston. There's only 2 Boston shops that even have a provisional license that are getting ready to open in Boston. Boston has, I think, 42 shops that they're planning on opening. 8 recreational actually have entered the process through host community agreements. And that whole process of opening stores in Boston is going to be hampered significantly by the federal corruption investigation into host community agreements. So everything has been slowed down quite a bit. So, because of the challenges that we faced in the community, not just with NETA, but what's forecasted to occur in Coolidge Corner and also on Comm Ave with the other two shops there, and the lack of action, frankly, that was being taken by town leaders, the community decided to take the action by submitting an initiative petition for a special town meeting for three specific asks, 3 solutions. The first is Warrant Article 1, which sets the maximum hours for recreational sales at a closing time. The original ask was 7 p.m. It's been modified to 8 p.m. Through the advisory committee process, which the petitioners agree with. 2 weeks ago, I think on Friday, the select board actually put on their agenda to change the operating hours for NETA, and miraculously, NETA and Sanctuary came to the table and volunteered to have their hours changed. The second warrant article is requiring and ask for a customer appointment before they come to the store. This is being done in Newton very successfully, and there's some very intentional as to why we'd like to see that. And then the third warrant article is to set up an independent moderators committee to assess our bylaws against best practices, what's working in other states, what's happened here. There's adjustments that we need to make. And very importantly, the petitioners put in an amendment back on November 1st to eliminate the moratorium. There was a moratorium, was a delay on the last 2 licenses being issued because it was supposed to be a 4-month assessment. That assessment timeframe got pushed out quite a bit. And so we removed the delay, quote unquote, the moratorium. So that does not exist anymore. The expected outcomes, what we would expect from the passage of those 3 warrant articles. First is the appointment systems are working well in Newton. We have a resident who works for the mayor. She is a community liaison, I think is her engagement, Deborah, I think is her position. And she has reported to us that they have no issues in Newton with respect to going to appointment only.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop for now.
Can I finish my 3 things? Did I run out of time?
We're tight on time for the evening. There's
Can I
another
wrap up?
speaker. Quickly.
Okay.
Very.
We've also had experts testify that appointment systems eliminate lines and that there is no empirical data that demonstrate a appointment system would decrease sales. We also know that reduced hours allows the businesses to thrive during the day and into the early evening while giving the nighttime back to the residents. And the 2-year sunset brings the relief to the affected residents while giving time for Boston and other communities to set up. And I'll just leave you with this picture. This is, on the left, is Garden Remedies in Newton at 6:30 p.m. on November 1st. They are appointment only. There's 1 person in line. They were at capacity. We know that because we tried to book appointment and they were out of appointments. And then on the right is NETA at the exact same time. No appointment. There's 139 people in line. So I'll just leave you with that image. Thank you.
Thanks. And now we have Carol Levin. And if you want to follow the flow of time, Ernie can be very helpful for you.
Thank you. So I'm Carol Levin. I'm a member of the advisory committee, and I'm on the planning and regulations subcommittee. Can you hear me now? Oh, in my mouth? Like this? Okay.
Get friendly with your local mic.
Get friendly with my local mic. So anyways, I'm Carol Levin, a member of the advisory committee and also a member of the planning and regulations subcommittee. The planning and regulations subcommittee, along with the public safety subcommittee, held a 5-hour hearing on these warrant articles on October 28th. And the distress among very many members of the community was very evident. The subcommittee understands that these issues have only started since March, when adult sales have started, and we understand that the petitioners are relating the issues and we characterize those issues as consisting of public nuisance issues, sort of bad behavior, litter, public urination, and public safety issues having to do with traffic, double parking, blocking in people's driveways. And that the petitioners are relating all of this to the increased volume at Netta since retail sales. In a desire to be responsive and to that distress, we agreed that there should be a restriction of hours, and the advisory committee has proposed, instead of 7 p.m., 8 p.m. for 6 days a week, and until 6 p.m. on Saturdays. I think that's what it is, for Saturdays and Sundays. Thank you. Regarding the second warrant article that deals with appointments, there was a mix of opinions as to whether or not that was the proper route to be taking. The advisory committee was concerned that the funds that Netta has paid as community impact fees that are designed to address these impacts on the community have not yet been spent, and many of us were hoping that there would be an opportunity for these funds to be spent, and then we could revisit the issue. So though the modification of hours was unanimous, the support of warrant Article 2 was mixed. I believe it was a 17-7 vote with 2 additional abstentions. Excuse me, which way did the vote go? 17 approved the appointments, 7 were against, and 2 abstained. Both of these warrant articles, though, since it is related to volume, and we do believe that the volume issue will resolve itself as more stores open, we put a sunset provision in, which means in June of 2022, these restrictions would go away. And the best analogy I can come up with is probably when Trader Joe's first opened, and it was the very first Trader Joe's in the community. Traffic and parking was horrible at Trader Joe's. And over the next, whatever it's been, 5 years, 7 years, is, well, not as terrible as it was. It has gotten better. So anyways, so that was the rationale behind the sunset provision, in hopes as more open up in Boston. We know of at least one that's opening up in Newton. We understand that there is a new site on Route 9 across from the Chestnut Hill Mall that's going to be opening up, or is applying for a license. So we're hopeful that certainly by 2022 that the volume-related issues will have resolved themselves. So.
Thank you very much. All right, so hands for questions from, very good.
Could we recognize the representative here from the marijuana operation before questions?
In what way?
Well, just that they come to be able to comment on whatever questions come up. I want them to be able to answer questions.
So you'd like to introduce them?
Yeah, that's all.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Rossitano. I'm Netta's president. Thank you for having us tonight. I first wanted to just start off to address some of the points that the petitioners raised in their presentation, specifically that appointments are working.
You're going to answer questions first.
Sure.
Stay right here.
Thank you. So do we have questions? I think we had a couple of hands before.
Kathleen Scanlon, Precinct 3, Town Meeting Member. I'm just curious, when did the volume of Netta become so apparent? Like, I understand the nuisance problem started in March, but was it ever presented to town meeting or the select board, the actual number of people going through the facility each day, or was that a complete surprise?
Netta does not publish any numbers. So in order to get sales volumes or anything like that, we had to back into it. And the way that we discovered the actual volume was to get the first 4 months of tax information that was paid for the 3% sales tax to the town. And from that, we were able to discern that it was a $75.2 million business estimate, take the 4 months and do a 12-month run rate. So it's 75.2 million. Netta has since published in a number of documents various ranges from 3,600 customers a day. I think in some pictures there was a 3,900 day that they referenced, and then a recent letter that they sent to the town gave an average of 320 customers per hour, and if you do the math, you can get up to that 3,900 number. So it is significant.
Yeah, thanks. So if I'm hearing correctly, it sounds like it was kind of a surprise, and I find that answer surprising during the whole host community agreement and licensing. I was part of town meeting back when it was coming through, our votes, and I just don't ever remember hearing that number. And so was that question just never asked? Is there, I don't know, is there some kind of, are they not required to disclose it? Was an estimate never given? I'm just curious.
So I've been a town meeting member for 6 months, so I can't give you the history on town meeting. I do know that if you take the ITE, which is the International Transportation Engineers recently published guidelines, which they now have a very specific cannabis category, and that category helps you define anticipated traffic based on square footage. I'm sure that if you were to run the calculations, these numbers would probably come out. In Netta's defense, I don't think those were even available back then. And again, to Netta's defense and the town's defense, I don't think anybody anticipated that there would be this number of customers coming in at any one time. And I would expect that Netta and everybody else expected to have in Massachusetts be rolling out more shops quicker, and they're just not. So I think everybody's surprised by it.
Kaya Vanderseel, town meeting member from Precinct 15. And I did sign the petition to put this before us in town meeting. I am curious about the need for the sunset clauses. Why were those put in? If you just left it the way it is, potentially things could change sooner. And there's only a sunset clause on the warrant article 1, or is it, there's also one on 3, right?
It's on 1 and 2.
1 and 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one question I have. The other question is, did anybody, appointment only sounds really great, and for most of us in this room, we operate by appointments all the time. There are large parts of the community, however, who do not operate that way. They don't have the luxury of setting appointments. They don't go to the grocery store at the same time every day. They don't go buy some beer at the same time every week or what have you. We're not listening to those people. Those voices are not being heard, and that is happening all the time, not just in this town, but all over this country. So I have thoughts about, have you talked to people, for instance, the people who frequent Netta?
So first, regarding the sunset provisions, it's easier to have something disappear automatically than have it be there and need to be repealed. We can always go in earlier to repeal it, but at least now we have a certainty that it'll go away by a certain date. Regarding the appointments, I personally did not support that provision. There was a lot of conversation in the subcommittee and in the whole AC committee about what this really means to people. And it was really a tension between the petitioners feeling that appointments will reduce the volume or smooth the volume versus concerns about access. And the weight that different advisory members, put on those two issues is reflected in this 17-7 vote. There were also concerns raised by NETA, and I'll let them talk about it, about how not just the inconvenience of having appointments, but concerns about people who need access for medical issues but don't have a medical license for some variety of reasons. And I think it would be more appropriate for NETA to answer that.
Sure. So this, NETA acknowledges that, there have been some concerns in the community. A couple of things I want to clarify is that our volume is not on average 3,900 people. On average, we see 2,500 people a day, which is more than we anticipated, because we did anticipate that there would be other shops open in Brookline and other shops open in Boston when we opened. But I will say that today, and that picture of the line that you saw presented is not the norm at NETA. Most days and most times we don't have lines outside. We have implemented efficiencies in our system that allow customers to be in and out in a very short amount of time. And the longest our line ever is, if you could even believe by that photo, that line is not more than 20 minutes. So we have changed our model. I'm sorry, not changed our model, changed our processes, made efficiencies to make sure that we can serve the number of people that we do. And part of that is because we have a reserve ahead option. This reserve ahead option allows customers to make their order in advance of their pickup. They can pick up any time once their order is ready. And the average transaction time for that reserve ahead order is 3 minutes. So people are in and out of NETA in a very efficient way. And so we feel like we really have smoothed out the volume issue in terms of, the number of customers that we're seeing in any given hour. And as such, we don't think appointments are necessary. We did agree to the reduction in hours because we heard from our neighbors. We know that while some neighbors have very different perspectives, that there are those who are still uncomfortable with NETA's operation, with the number of people coming into town, especially in the evenings. And so we acknowledged that, and we came forward to reduce our hours. But this is a matter of access. There are major privacy concerns as it relates to an appointment-only model. People who want to consume cannabis often don't want anyone to know that they're doing that. There's still a serious stigma associated with cannabis use, and that's why 35% of our customers opt not to use our reserve ahead system, because they don't want to put their name in a database. They don't want to leave a digital footprint, and this is really, really important for people. So there are people with less means that don't have access to the internet, that don't have access to a smartphone to make an appointment, and we want to make sure that cannabis is accessible to them as well.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, if I could just make one other quick point, which is that Garden Remedies in Newton is literally the only operator out of over 30 operators in the state that utilize an appointment model. It does not work well for this type of business. In fact, it doesn't work well for the purchase of products. And I would ask, what other product do you need to make an appointment to purchase? Appointments are for services. The expert that spoke on the petitioner's behalf spoke exclusively about appointment models for service businesses. So this is not an apples to apples type of conversation.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, I just wanted
to. Both of you can take a minute at the mic.
Thank you.
Actually, the
I
mic's-
just want to say the Economic Development Advisory Board, which I'm also on, had a tour of NETA this past Monday, which was very interesting. And we were there for about 45 minutes. And in that 45 minutes, the number of people going through and reserve ahead was impressive. And the speed, the person that came in the door behind me was probably out of there in just 2 or 3 minutes. But on the other hand, people who didn't do reserve ahead, because we were on a mezzanine looking down on the floor, there was some people there that were there at the counter talking to someone when we walked in, and 45 minutes later, they were still there. So we could appreciate the difficulty in having appointments be this one-size-fits-all for everyone. But it was a very impressive and eye-opening tour for those of us on EDAB and we appreciated being able to see it.
Thank you.
So I too have gone through NETA, the full life cycle, and made a purchase there. An extremely efficient organization. There's no doubt about that. That's not the question and not the issue. First, I do want to challenge Amanda's assertion that their average is $2,500 a day. The math just doesn't work. It would mean that their average sale is probably triple what the state average is $41. In order to add 2,500 customers a day to get to $75.2 million, it's just that the math just doesn't work. In fact, she sent a letter to the select board dated November 9th, and I'm going to quote it. Currently, hourly transactions for the 180-day average is a grand total of 320. So that's 320. If you take 5 days times 12 hours and 2 days times 13 hours, that's an average of 12.29 hours. You multiply that by 320, you get to 3,900 customers a day. Now, some days there might be less, some days there might be more. We think there might be more. So I do challenge the 2,500. I don't think it's factual. And it's actually not true that there's only one. Many using appointment only. There's been a number of companies in Massachusetts that started out as appointment only and with a sunset clause. Some were 3 months, some were 6 months. We know of several that are actually in the works now that are going to be going to appointment only to start out. So, the challenge here is that there's thousands of customers coming in per day, and it's not, the issue isn't when there's nobody in line, it's when there's so many people in line. And you got to realize when there's 100 people in line or 150 people in line, that means the cars are taking the parking spaces while they're waiting in line. It means that the cars are idling when the person that's waiting for them they're in someone's driveway. It means that Ubers are circling. It's the inventorying time in the neighborhood that's the problem, and appointment only makes that go away because you bring the customers in at the time you're going to serve them.
Thank you. And now we have a question.
Yeah. George Abbott White, Precinct 9. I'm not sure who is going to be able to answer this, but my questions have to do with they're operational. So I've visited the site 3 or 4 times. I didn't go, too close to it. Walked the neighborhood some, and talked with some of the police who were there. So I've got a number of questions. Number one, who is staffing in terms of security? Are they Brookline police, or do we have officers from other neighborhoods? I'll just go through them real quick. Number two, I've seen and spoken with 2 at a time in front, but I suspect that there are 3, and so that leads to my third question as to whether or not people are in effect cops are walking a beat. Are they just in the immediate neighborhood of the facility? They're walking around White Place. Are they going up further on Route 9? Whatever. Number 4, what kind of security backup arrangements are there? And by that, I mean that in these sort of opening phases of marketing, as you say, something with a stigma, people can get a bit excited, sometimes maybe even out of control. So I'm curious about what communication arrangements are set up or will be set up between the facility itself and, say, the police station up the street. And my last question is, when I spoke on several occasions with the officers, I said, how are we doing on getting people for details like this? Because I know that we're stretched a bit because of all the construction. And they said, well, we thought that if the rates were higher or something like that, you might be able to get some more people. So my question on that is, what is the compensation and who pays it? So I can go through these again, but there you are.
Thank you for your question, and that actually may be necessary. So we're a little tight on time, and there are 3 of you who might want to speak to this. Can you either talk amongst yourself or come to some agreement so that... Great. So you're all comfortable with that? And then perhaps if the two of you wish to respond, you could just keep that brief.
Thanks, Ben.
Very good.
I will be brief. So NET has actually been operating at that site since 2016 as a medical establishment, and since we have developed quite a strong relationship with the Brookline Police Department, we pay for, NETA on our own, pay for 2 police details during all of our operating hours and 1 overnight. We also have our own security staff and lot attendants so that work the exterior of the facility to make sure things are moving smoothly. In terms of backup for the police, we work closely with Ed Davis and his team. They're our security consultants, and we actually recently worked out an agreement with the Brookline Police to bring Ed's team on Thursday through Saturdays to supplement that police detail in the event that one of those details couldn't be present, and if they are both present, you know, we have an additional post that we use those officers for. So I think that answers most of your question. Oh, and then in terms of police enforcement and the beat, there was actually a $40,000 reserve fund expenditure of the very first expenditure of those impact fees, $1.4 million that we've contributed to date. $40,000 that a part of that money went towards I believe, a bicycle or a pedestrian unit to monitor the area. And
that's still in operation?
It is, and the impact fees that are being allocated, ironically, just at this very town meeting that these restrictions are being proposed, will add additional monies for police enforcement as well. Thank you.
And just the last thing, the rate, I mean, how does it compare?
For the police detail?
If someone's doing a detail for, gas company, something like that, as opposed to NETA.
Yep, my understanding is it is the same exact rate. In fact, the police asked us if we would support an increase to the police detail rate, not just for NETA, but across the board, and we did support that increase. So I can't tell you off the top of my head how much the rate is, but it's consistent with any other industry.
Very good.
You looking for a job, George?
If
you look for a job.
Oh, I taught junior high for 10 years. I've sort of done those. Okay. Thank you.
So if there are no...
Okay, Arthur Conquest again.
Very good, Arthur.
What's your name again? My name is Amanda. Way back a year ago, 6 months ago, whatever, I was curious about what went on in the bank, and I went to the front door and asked if I could just go in and look, and it was almost like I was asking, could I go in and steal some reefer? Okay, they had the handcuffs ready for me. If I call you, would you get me a tour of, I just want to look inside.
100%. If you bring a valid ID showing that you're 21, you can enter the facility.
Do I look under 21? Second thing, how many people in the audience read the paper today about Bloomberg and his crazy apologies to a black church in Brooklyn, and what he did with his stop and frisk? It's really, what are the penalties for someone nowadays selling pot on the street? In other words, okay, so I wanted to go into the business of selling reefer illegally.
Well, that would be illegal.
Yeah, right, no, okay.
Excuse me, I don't think we have anyone here who's authorized or qualified to answer that question. They're not enforcement people.
Public consumption is illegal, and you certainly can't sell it. The whole purpose of legalizing marijuana was to stop the illicit market and street sales, and the problems associated with it.
We have another comment back here.
Oh, I think Deborah also had a question.
I'll get to her in a minute.
Great.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Kimmel. I am the opening manager for Sanctuary, located in Coolidge Corners. I just want to make one comment, please. That goes to the reservation-only policy. And I would like to state that reservation-only doesn't work well in the service industry either. that Open Table, the largest reservation entity for restaurants nationally, has now put into place what they call a 4-strike policy, which means after 4 reservations and you don't show, you are terminated for life. What that is suggesting is that reservation only, even in restaurants, a service industry, is not working. That's been followed up by the National Restaurant Association, who has gone to the extent of telling all restaurants to only hold reservations with a credit card because so many people are not showing for their reservations that they should be charged.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm done.
Let's move on to a question.
Thank you.
Deborah Brown, Precinct 1. I'm still trying to figure out what's in it for a resident to have the pot business in town. I mean, the lines may be shorter. And oh, by the way, Sanctuary, I did try. I sent you guys an email to discuss, working with the community. I never got a response. Never got a response. And you would be the third one that's giving me a card. So
At least I'm going to answer your email.
okay, I'll talk to you afterwards. But my question is, in light of all of the complaints that we've heard, what is the value? I mean, what is this town really getting out of having pot in this town? And I have a follow-up question. There's a whole issue now around youth and psychosis, marijuana-induced psychosis. And I wonder what kind of mitigation programs that you will have in place for young adults.
So, Deborah, I'd like to answer your question about what helps, what the benefit that we get for having marijuana outlets in town. The answer is we get marijuana, legal marijuana, clean marijuana. And if you don't think that there was marijuana in town before the marijuana outlets came, come on. So the town of Concord voted in favor of the referendum to legalize marijuana, but when it came to deciding whether or not to have marijuana outlets in town, the majority voted not to. And one of the comments that people made in the campaign was, well, there'll be marijuana available to kids in high school and so forth. And my response to that was, if you don't want your child exposed to marijuana, don't send them to high school. Let's get real. The advantage of having legal marijuana is very substantial from a health perspective, from as well as from the perspective of not creating a class of people who are breaking the law in order to get something that they feel is perfectly legitimate to use.
Deb, before you ask your follow-up question, I just want to make a quick comment, just to get us back on track for a second. It's the petitioner's position that this is not the product issue. It's not a product issue. It's a volume issue. Okay, we're talking about an establishment that brings in thousands of customers into a community that's having a very difficult time absorbing them. It's not about the product, and it's an interesting discussion, but we are talking about volume.
You did take the words right out of my mouth. Thank you very much. It is an interesting discussion, but it is not related to the Warrant article, and we have one more on the table. If there's anything that's specifically germane to this Warrant article, or the pair of them, I'm happy to entertain it. Otherwise, I'd like to move on to the last Warrant article. Yep.
Did you turn it off? Oh, it's on? Oh, sorry. So I just wanted to talk to the privacy issue. I made an appointment at Garden Remedies, and I just used my dog's name and was able to get an appointment. And I also know that QLIS, the system that they use, can develop a completely anonymous
way of buying marijuana. So I just don't understand why that is an issue that you're fighting. So maybe you could respond.
So what we're hearing from our customers, who we've surveyed on this topic, because obviously they're the ones who will be affected here, is that they're concerned about leaving any type of digital footprint, which again is why 35% of our customers don't use our reserve ahead option. In order to make an appointment, maybe you don't have to use your first name, maybe you don't have to use your phone number, although I believe Garden Remedies does ask for a name and phone number, being the only operator in the state that requires an appointment. But we hear from people that they don't want to leave any type of digital footprint. This is a federally illegal product, and people are really concerned about the stigma that's already associated with this product. So we're responding to our customers' concerns that requiring an appointment would be an invasion of their privacy.
All right. Shall we move on to the next warrant article?
I'm just going to make one quick statement.
Yep.
So just to be clear, the Cannabis Control Commission requires all retail cannabis operators to videotape every customer that comes through the door. That videotape needs to be stored for 90 days and indefinitely if there's any type of legal challenge. Also, many operators, Netta included, takes a photo of every customer's photo ID as they walk through the door. I know that they scan it. It's still a digital footprint, Amanda. It's a digital footprint. So this idea, it's a complete red herring that this whole thing about digital footprints. In this day and age, most people have a phone. If someone doesn't have a phone, they can walk up, they can make a phone call through a payphone, or they could walk up and ask to go in with a reserved appointment. So this is really a red herring, but I'm going to move on. So Warrant Article 3 is a resolution for two specific things. It asks for a moderator's
I'm just going to stop you for just a minute. So this is one where it's going to be just you and Carol speaking?
I believe so.
Okay, great. And that's what's appropriate.
Yeah,
Okay,
it should be pretty quick,
Yep.
I hope. It's pretty simple. It's very straightforward. So it's a resolution, so it's a non-binding resolution that asks for a moderators committee to look at the bylaws that were created for cannabis and make some recommendations based on what we've experienced within Brookline, what we're seeing, other best practices that are taking place throughout the state and also throughout the country. There are other states that are much more mature than we are with respect to our approach to cannabis. Things such as the size of the stores for the zoning. Right now, we have a 5,000 square foot zoning. That is humongous, and it's a reason why we see volumes that we do. And also, such things as equity. We have no equity program in Brookline for cannabis. Matter of fact, today it was reported that Boston has just completely revamped their cannabis licensing process, and they're going to be putting a heavy focus on equity applicants. And so this would be an opportunity for this study committee to do that as well. It's very important. It's very important to note that the Warrant Article 3, the petitioners have removed the requirement for a moratorium. So there's no moratorium on the two last licenses, which would affect ComF.
So the only concern that the advisory committee had was that there's a request to have a study committee and nothing happens. So we put in a November 1st, 2020 date by which this committee has to report in their findings, with the thought that that would give people time to think about what they want to do and make it onto the spring 2021 town meeting schedule.
Very good. Are there questions on this topic? None being heard. I think we can close the evening. Thank you all very much.